everybody, welcome back to the K2 Online Paddle School. We are back here on YouTube, and this week we're doing a quick gear review on the Viper Va'a Outrigger canoe paddles. Christmas has come early here in Hernando, Florida, and my package of Viper Va'a paddles has come fairly quickly. This video is not sponsored by Viper Va'a. I purchased these out of my own personal funding for my club usage as well as my personal usage. These Viper paddles are handmade in Tahiti. Overall, from the order date to receiving them here in the US, it took about 3 weeks. Some of the paddles I have are for friends and club members who have not yet picked up their paddles, so I still have them wrapped here, so they appeared in a very large box and they have a little bit of saran wrap around the edge to protect them. So the paddles that I ordered on this are the 4 that are here in the carbon layup, and I have owned and used a hybrid Viper Va'a paddle for about 18 months. I've used this for all kinds of things. I have surfed with it on downwinders. I've done chatted jack for 32 miles using this paddle specifically. And so one of the things that I like about this brand in particular is that they offer a large range of different blade sizes and shapes. Combine that with the different shaft options and you can open up a lot of customization towards finding a paddle that fits you perfectly. I'm a staunch believer that the tool by itself is not the determining factor towards success, but how you feel wielding the tool. So paddles that I find useful for myself personally may be information that is not very applicable for you if you are a larger paddler, if you paddle faster or slower, or for shorter distances or longer distances. There's a lot of things that go into it, but hopefully this video can add some insight into the things that I'm looking for to help you strategize ways to pinpoint paddles that fit you perfectly. So the customizations with the Viper paddles, there are 3 different blade styles. There is a 9-degree offset round, a 9-degree offset square, and then a 10-degree offset round. So the degree offset is this angle here being 9 degrees or 10 degrees. The larger that number, the softer the catch is going to feel, and then the lower this number, the stronger the catch is going to feel. The length of the stroke behind you with the higher blade angle is increased. Paddles that have less of this offset are stronger at the front, but not as effective further back into the stroke. Round versus square is the shape of the tip of the blade, and then the rest of the blade is proportional based on this. So the square finds a little bit more power immediately in the stroke. The blades are typically a little bit shorter, so that power that you find in the middle and the end of the stroke is not quite as high. So these are some shapes that go into your feel and connection with the water, and then the next variable is the overall blade size. Each of those configurations also comes in 3 or 4 different blade sizes. Having a smaller blade or a larger blade based on what you're trying to do with it is something that you can try to pinpoint. Next factor is going to be the composite material of the shaft. The bamboo shaft is flexible, so when you put pressure on this, this will actually bend as you are taking a stroke. The force that you find in the blade is lost in the bend of the shaft. The amount that you feel as you're taking the stroke is much softer. Paddles that are full carbon are much stiffer and will give you a hard feeling through the water. So when I'm choosing my paddles, if I have a hybrid shaft, I typically want a blade that's larger. The larger blade will feel smaller when you're using a wood shaft. In these new paddles, all of them are going to be full carbon. Here in the US, we don't have rules on needing a wood shaft. We can use carbon fiber all the way through the paddle. And so having a lighter, stiffer paddle is more effective, but if you use a large blade with the stiffer shaft, you will typically find too much pressure, and this leads to joint pain for paddlers that may not be using their whole body to take a stroke. So to counter this, I have blade sizes that are very small in comparison to what standard hybrid shafts may have. It's common to see paddles that are 9.5 or 9.75 or 10 inches wide at their widest point, and most of these paddles are much smaller. Using this paddle as a base, I went in knowing that I wanted the full carbon ones to get them a little bit lighter and that they were going to be stiffer to get a smaller blade. Overall, the paddles are incredibly light across the board, and there's only a small difference between the hybrid and the full carbon variation. The blades are fairly thin, so there's not a ton of weight in the actual blade face, right? Having a really thick blade face means that it feels heavy, and the standard shaft fits nicely in my hand. It's not very large, but I feel that most paddlers can use this without worrying about it being too big or too small. So wielding the paddle and doing switches, it feels very ergonomic. So being in a position where I run a club, I get to get a bunch of paddles for myself, but a lot of these paddles go into usage within the club organization. So if people do not own their own paddles, they typically get to use a pretty nice, high quality piece of equipment because it is from my personal arsenal. And so doing this, I got 4 paddles, right? So I have a paddle that I want specifically for the OC1, the OC2, paddling in an OC6, and then a new steering blade for the OC6. So each one, I'm looking for a different idea in each of these different vessels, whether I'm paddling with a group of people, an individual person, the height and leverages that we're gonna find in these different boats. I try to pinpoint a lot of these ideas and have paddles to match the scenarios that I'm in. If I had to choose one paddle, I would take all of these ideas and try to find a middle ground, right? But in this scenario, I get one paddle for each one. So each paddle can be a bit different from one to the other to fit a specific role. So as we go through all these, I'll let you guys know about the specs and what I'm looking for in the paddle and how that differs from one vessel to the other. This is not an absolute, right? So what you're looking for in your paddle stroke and from one boat to the next may be different, right? But again, just kind of strategizing some of the ideas that go into a whole range of paddles. Last thing that I forgot to mention with the customization is there are all kinds of different designs that you can get. So looking at the shaft options, the different blade models, and the different types of graphics that you can get on here, you can almost ensure that you get a customized paddle that may be a one of one. We were able to go through and get some pretty cool designs and whatnot. I believe this one is my favorite one with the coloring, and the matte finish on this, I believe, looks a lot nicer. Online it looked glossy, but you're able to really take in the colors in this matte formatting. So I have the full carbon variation. This is the OC1 paddle for me. So what I'm looking for is a 49-inch long paddle for my height inside of my specific OC1, the Draco. My Kaiwa Draco sits a little bit higher than some other OC1 models, so I like to use a 49 in that boat specifically. The blade that I'm using here is a 9-degree offset round. I believe this is the smallest blade size, so it is 22 centimeters wide, which is 8.6 inches wide in the middle. And then the paddle is 45 centimeters long, which is about 17.7. The surface area is 704 square centimeters, or about 109 square inches. I have a piece of paper right here with all those numbers, so don't think that I have that hard memorized as I go through all of these. So overall, a lot of you are thinking, man, 8.6 inches wide. I use a paddle that's a 9 or a 9.5 or a 10. And the stiffness that you get in a full carbon orientation and the 9-degree offset is pretty low to allow for a super heavy catch. Using this paddle so far, it's very interesting because it is the smallest blade configuration that I have, and it is not the longest paddle that I have in this group. Every time the blade tip touches the water, the amount of force that you can find makes you look at the paddle and think, is this thing not gigantic? The blade is nice and reinforced. You can see the contours on the front end here prevent this paddle blade from flexing. The dihedral is very prominent to grab a lot of water. And then going up the shaft, this is a very stiff shaft to give you a very hard feel. So as you set up, the moment the blade tip touches, you can feel your whole body connect with the water. There is no interruption. There is no flexibility within the shaft. There's no compromise. The moment the blade touches, you've made a connection with the water. And so it's a very hard and very decisive grip on the water, which is awesome in the OC1. When I'm propelling it myself, when I'm trying to sprint or catch a swell or stay on a draft, I want to make sure that my blade makes this connection with the water and moves the boat forward. So the paddle is proper to get my hand into a very ergonomic position. Everything that I'm looking for in an OC1 paddle is right here. Usage of this is going to be for long distance racing, right? So if the distances were much shorter, having a much larger blade would be more intuitive to get that extra bit of horsepower to go faster in an urgent way. But paddling for a half marathon or a full marathon, looking for a paddle that allows you to stay in a little bit lower of a gear helps maintain long distance efficiency. And because of the stiffness, if you push harder into the paddle, you get immediate boat speed, but it allows you this opportunity to paddle just hard enough to hold position or to stay on a draft train. So how you wield the paddle is just as important as what shape, size, and configuration goes into it. So moving on to the OC2 paddle. So my Kaiwa Gemini sits a little bit lower in the cockpit, especially in seat 2. I feel like I'm about an inch lower to the water overall. And so having the paddle an inch shorter to match that has been ideal. The 48-inch that I had been using felt excellent in the OC2. So overall, I just tried to duplicate that paddle in a full carbon variation. This paddle is 23 centimeters wide and 47 centimeters long. It's about 9 inches wide by 18.5 inches long. Surface area is 769 centimeters square or 119 square inches. So this is about 10 more square inches than the OC1 paddle. Blade's orientation is the square 9-degree, which is just like my hybrid paddle. And so using this paddle, it's so interesting that the shape of the blade and the length of the paddle can make such a big difference in your overall feel with the stroke. And we're trying to take these different feelings and use them in the most optimized way, right? So the feeling that I get with this paddle is a bit different than the OC1, but I'm trying to use it in an environment where another paddler is helping me. The blade overall is larger, and the grab that you get in the middle and the end of the stroke is slightly higher, but when you have another force in the boat that is moving it with you, this doesn't feel so large overall. In the OC1, the paddle being shorter changes how it feels comparatively to the OC1 paddle, but again, in an OC2, being closer to the water, these positions and leverages are going to change a little bit, and that feeling will start to increase being closer to the water. These two paddles are almost identical, but knowing that I was going with the carbon shaft instead of the hybrid, this blade is 2 sizes smaller than this blade. And overall, the feel is very close. Again, that connection at the catch and in the middle of the stroke is slightly higher because the paddle does not compromise at all, right? So your body is absorbing this force more, but you're getting more reward out of dealing with this pressure with more power out of your stroke. In the 2-person boat especially, this is an ideal blade that I'm looking for, being just a little bit shorter because you sit lower to the water, and having a blade face that is slightly larger and an angle of the blade tip that is more aggressive for finding more pressure. It pays off big time when the boat is moving faster, and if you have a very savvy partner, this is something that can help propel the boat a little bit faster with you. So the next is the OC6 paddling paddle, not the steering blade. And I told a lot of people I was gonna get this design on the paddle, right? And I don't think a lot of people thought that I was actually going to do it, but I think it looks excellent. I think it's very artistic in nature. I don't know, and I hope that I don't have to blur this out on YouTube or remove this entire section, but if you're seeing it, it means that this passed the inspection. So with the OC6, it sits the highest out of all the other boats, right? It's much higher than OC1 or OC2. So for me, about 50 inches is what I'm looking for. Each boat is a little bit different. I could get an unlimited Outrigger canoe or a spec boat Outrigger canoe paddle, but I don't paddle in the OC6 that often to warrant the ½ inch or additional inch in difference needed for that. Most of the time I'm in the steering seat, so optimizing that paddle is more effective for me. This is the 10-degree offset round blade. The blade is 22.5 centimeters wide and 47 centimeters long. This is about 8.85 inches wide by 18.5 inches long. The surface area is 751 centimeters squared or 116 square inches. So this paddle is slightly smaller than the more aggressively shaped square 9-degree, which is the OC2 paddle. But because the length is an additional 2 inches longer, the amount of force that you can find and length in the water is a bit higher. Being in that higher orientation is going to bring your bottom hand up slightly higher, and the amount of force that you're going to find on a lever that is this long versus a lever that is this long is the difference in the feel that you're gonna get on the blade. Using this paddle today in the OC1, one of the things that was very interesting was each time that I took the stroke, it just felt light and effortless as the blade touched the water. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, this feels like the small blade, and my OC1 paddle feels like a gigantic blade. But I held them up to each other, and sure enough, the OC1 paddle is narrower in the width and it's shorter in the length. What's the difference? They're both round with the blade shape, but the offset is the difference. One is 9 degrees, and the 10-degree offset means that the leverages that you find immediately at the catch aren't quite as strong. So that immediate grab and connection and that pull right at the first moment of the stroke is not as present because of the offset being up that extra 1 degree. And so normally I would say, man, 1 degree, who cares? It's not a big deal. The blade's length, the blade's size, these are things that are more important. But this really opened my eyes that 1 degree changes tremendously your interaction with the water. On the flip side, this paddle has leverages very far within the stroke, right? Because it's longer, because the blade is larger, as you get to the middle and the end of the stroke, there's a lot more pull and grab and force that you're gonna find, but you're not gonna find it immediately like you would with the other paddle directly at the catch. And I literally were putting the paddles between my laps, and I take 2 strokes and switch and take 2 more strokes, and it was really baffling. But again, that 1 degree difference can change how you're going to feel the stroke. So in an OC6, this is not a bad thing, right? You want to try to find the leverages in the middle and the end of the stroke, because that's where our positioning is the strongest. If you are in a heavy spec boat and you are in a boat that is not moving very fast, if you have any novice paddlers, finding too much pressure at the catch can be detrimental to your health. So having the blade go in elegant and smoothly and easily at the front is an idea that you're trying to find in order to find that power later in the stroke. I didn't think it would be that big of a difference, but it's definitely something when you use them side by side, you would immediately think the OC1 paddle is larger based on its initial interaction with the water. But as you try to push through the entire stroke, you can definitely feel that this is the larger paddle by the end of the stroke. So the last paddle we'll briefly look at, if you guys want to see a steering paddle comparison, I have 4 or 5 steering blades, and I'd love to come in here and dissect each one of them and go over some of the different ideas. But for the most part, I'll compare this one to my other primary paddle. When we talk about blade offset, the Kealoha Hawaii is 13.5 degrees from the angle of the blade tip to the shaft. And then the Viper steering blade is only 4 degrees. So you can see how aggressively shaped the Hawaii is. So when we talk about the amount of force that you find at the catch, the force that we're finding with the higher blade angle is going to be dramatically lower. And the amount of force that we find with this paddle is going to be much higher immediately. The other aspect is the Viper paddle has a straight shaft, and then the Hawaii is double bent. The difference I was really looking for is this Hawaii paddle is incredibly heavy comparatively to all my other paddles. When paddlers have paddles that are like 6 or 8 ounces, I hand them this one and they're like, man, you must be strong like Hercules. And the reality is I'm not. So having a paddle that's just a little bit lighter just makes it easier to switch back and forth each time, and keeping sync with the crew and your ability to know that I can go from here to here faster helps with the steering corrections, versus if I'm in a situation for steering on the other side, I might not be able to switch this paddle incredibly fast to get there. So now I have to make some other correction that might not be as advantageous. But being able to switch a little bit quicker helps make some of these decisions easier. And having a lighter paddle makes that also easier to do. So I haven't steered with this one yet, but I did paddle with it today. It feels like a gigantic paddle. This is 24 centimeters wide and 54 centimeters long. So that's 9.4 inches wide by 22.5 inches long. And the overall square inches is 144, so it's like 30% bigger than all the other paddles. I paddled and sprinted with each of these, and I was hoping to hit like 9 or 10 miles with each of them. I don't know which one was the fastest. This one felt like I went the fastest because the blade is so gigantic, but diminishing returns sets in even when you're only taking 30 strokes. So there's a chance that one of the other small boat oriented paddles ended up being the faster sprinting one. Excellent. So that's some insight into, again, what I'm looking for within the paddles that I'm choosing and wielding, and giving a breakdown and a synopsis of this brand in particular. Having customization makes the process more complex, but if you're at a point where you are highly optimized with your motion and you're looking to get 1 millimeter more of distance per stroke, having a paddle that matches exactly what you're looking for is the key. For manufacturers, it's very simple to offer one blade size, one configuration, and just sell them, right? It's much easier to do that. Selling paddles that are very highly customizable and have to be handmade on order date is frustrating for international use as well as for retailers. Overall, I'm at a point in my paddling journey where I don't mind leaning into these specifics. And in the world of Outrigger Canoe, this is one of the only brands that does this, but in the world of surf skis, Bracha Paddles has 11, 12 different shapes, and then they have like 4 to 8 different sizes of each shape. It is a rabbit hole that is even more complicated than the Outrigger Canoe world presents, but it's just a standard. Most brands are gonna have this huge array of paddles, and again, it can help you determine and find exactly what works for you. Working on feel and finding what works for you, that's the key. Is the paddle going to make you faster immediately? Of course not, right? It's all about you and how you're wielding it, and it's always a marketing gimmick to think that the paddle is the immediate difference. Finding a tool that works specifically with your strengths and accentuates your ability, this is now an item that can show your true potential, which will make you faster. Thank you all so much for checking this out today. If there's anything else that you guys want to see discussed, please leave a comment or message me anytime. If you have questions about paddles and you're debating between a couple of different ideas, feel free to reach out anytime. I'm here to interact with you all and try to help you guys make informed decisions. Don't forget to check out the K2NOnlinePaddleSchool.com. We're going into the new year at the release of this video, so if you have some new year resolution plans for your paddling adventure, just consider bringing me along with you on that journey. If you want to come to Hernando, Florida any time of the year, if you want me to come to you and do a clinic, feel free to reach out anytime. I'm planning on traveling the world here in 2025. Thank you all so much for the support, and we'll see you all next week with next week's K2N paddle tip video.